I teach that meetings are games. Okay, so games have goals, they have rules, they have a way to track progress, they have opt-in participation. When those things are missing, the meeting is unenjoyable and not satisfying, and you might even resent being there.
Because who wants to play a game with no rules?
Exactly. Or even worse, rules that apply to some people but not to others.
Yes.
Or rules that are vague or hard to understand or even discover.
Welcome to the Conversation Factory. I'm your host, Daniel Stillman. Each episode, I'll talk to an amazing conversation designer to try and distill insights we can all bring into our work and lives. Human conversation is a material that can be shaped by design, and shifting conversations in everyday meetings, in organizations, and yourself can create real change. And I hope to help you do it better and more authentically. I'd love to have you stay part of the conversation. Head over to theconversationfactory.com to sign up for my newsletter and never miss an episode. That's theconversationfactory.com. I'd also love for you to be part of the show. If there's a challenging transformation you're working through, head over to theconversationfactory.com, click coaching, and sign up for 30 minutes of free coaching that we might use on the show. Head over to theconversationfactory.com, hit coaching, and let me know what conversations you need help redesigning. Enjoy the episode. On today's episode, I talked to Dan Mezick, author of The Culture Game and founder of Open Space Agility. Dan has a really unique perspective on culture, self-management, and how to make Agile really work. At its core, Agile believes that a team doing work is the authority on what needs to be done for that work, since they're closest to the work. This is self-management at the team level. In trying to make a switch to Agile ways of working, organizations often dictate new frameworks, patterns, and procedures. To dictate a new way for how work is to be done is basically the opposite of self-management, and a clear limit on how an externally generated conversation design can really work. Change from the outside is going to get pushback. That Agile is implemented in a non-Agile way is an irony not lost on Dan. In Dan's view, culture is a game, how work is done is a game. Meetings are games, with rules, ways progress is measured. Some of the rules are implicit, some are explicit, but it's kind of annoying to play a game with no rules, or with rules unevenly applied, or with rules that change without notice. If you're a reader of Calvin and Hobbes, you've heard of CalvinBall, and you know how frustrating it is. Whoever must play can't really play. That's from James Carse's excellent book on Finite and Infinite games. Dan suggests that Agile be invite only, pull not push, and that pull invitation be in the form of an open space meeting. People that opt in, step into the circle, decide what to talk about, and leave with proceedings, outputs. That starts a new game with new rules written by those who want to play. Dan's open space agility process is an answer to the question of how to change the rules of a work culture in a clear and fair way without hemorrhaging people in the process. Open space dictates that whoever responds to the invitation are the right people. What conclusions they come to are the right conclusions, worthy of an experimental test at the very least. Open space meeting philosophy has infected my own conversation design practice. I feel particularly uneasy when a facilitator I'm working with tries to massage or shift decisions the group is coming to. It's one of the reasons I say a facilitator should ask better questions instead of giving answers. A great question is an invitation. An invitation is the start of a new conversation. This episode has me rethinking all the invitations I send out for all my meetings and all my conversations, moment by moment. Are my invitations inviting? Are people hearing an invitation to the game I want them to play? Be sure to head over to theconversationfactory.com where you can download a bonus track where Dan and I talk about Holocracy and his work with Zappos. It's really amazing. Be sure to check that out and enjoy the episode. Dan Mezick, thank you so much for making time to talk with us today. I'm really excited to talk to you about agility, not just in teams, but also in organizations and in people. So thank you so much and welcome to the Conversation Factory.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So the first question we were just talking a little bit about is, I think a lot of people don't really know what Agile really means. And you talked about honoring the manifesto. Can you just talk a little bit about what that means to you?
Yeah. So the Agile Manifesto was written by, a group of, technology people in 2001. And I believe Alistair Coburn pulled everyone together, way back when at a ski resort, right? And they wrote these 4 values and 12 principles. The reason why they wrote those, Daniel, is because delivering anything in the software engineering context is extremely difficult. A team of 1 can have really, really great conversations. Teams of 1 or more sometimes have trouble communicating, right? So software has a funny way of demanding a lot of quality in the interactions between the humans that are creating it. So there's it's arguable, and there's some thought leaders who I can point you to in a second who say that basically the quality of the software is the function of the quality of the interactions by and between the members of the team. So the Agile Manifesto is basically a set of guidelines that can help you focus on the things you need to focus on and have conversations around the things you have to have conversations around in service to delivering great software product. That's what the manifesto is all about. In fact, the first value is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So what must that mean? See what I mean?
Yeah, it seems self-evident that the quality of the product would rely on the quality of the interactions of the people, but that seems like something that maybe people gloss over.
Oh, yeah. Well, here's let's just skip right to sort of the most important thing, right, which is the software engineering environment that's kind of a laboratory for what we might call high-performance sociology, right? So we're learning through the demands of the software engineering environment how to be a great team, and well beyond software, by the way. In other words, the software world is a kind of laboratory for figuring team things out.
So one of the things that a quote here I have from you is that Jeff Sutherland once said to you that there was no standard Scrum implementation, and that to you was a profound statement. That meant that it had no context and that it was only real when it was put into a place. Of
course, yes. That's absolutely right. So for any people who are out there who are programmers, object-oriented programmers, the Scrum Guide is actually the definition of what you would call an abstract class in object-oriented. It's not to be instanced at all. It's to be inherited, and then your class is instanced, the one that inherits the Scrum thing. So the no standard Scrum implementation means it's always specific to your particular situation. You're going to create your own custom Scrum thing, and there's Scrum doesn't have a lot of prescription, but the prescription it does have is not negotiable. So there's certain things about it that are very, very well defined and are required. Otherwise, you're not playing the Scrum game. You're playing some other game. So, for example, there's only 3 roles in Scrum, and that only one of them has multiple people in it, right? Those are rules in Scrum that aren't to be, trifled with.
What are those basic rules? Because in my view of designing a conversation, Scrum seems to be a really interesting prescription for what you do and what you don't do.
Yeah. So when we talk about interactions, right? Like one of the things that's going to come up right away is protocols. So if you look at the daily Scrum, the daily Scrum is a design meeting. 15 minutes long. It's owned by the team, and the purpose of the meeting is to provide information to all the team members about what all the other team members are up to, what they're doing, and what blocks they're facing, and so forth and so on. And it's a protocoled meeting, right? It's scripted. The rule is that we go around in no particular order, and everybody answers 3 questions, and when the answers to those questions are complete or the 15 minutes are up, the meeting is over. And that's the daily Scrum. It's a protocoled meeting. It's not like you just do whatever you want in the daily Scrum. It doesn't work that way. So a very common thing that people do is they get into problem solving in the daily Scrum, and there is no allowance for that in the Scrum definition. The daily Scrum is intended to create bookmarks for conversations throughout the day. The daily Scrum is just, it's optimized on introverts, right? So a lot of, so you won't get this from anyone else, but I teach it, and here's what it is. The daily Scrum is designed to be tolerable by introverted software engineers who hate meetings.
Yes.
Right? So that's the story. So it's designed to be extremely short, and then we're supposed to have voluntary opt-in conversations throughout the day about what we heard in the daily Scrum and solve some of those problems.
It's also designed to be very efficient because the design asks us to remove problem solving from just problem stating.
That's correct. And that's a very hard thing for engineers to do because we want to jump right to problem solving. That's what we get paid for. That's what we're wired for. That's what we're born to do, so forth and so on.
Well, it's not just engineers, though. I mean, this is
everybody.
This is something that design thinking builds in as well, is separating problem framing from problem solving. And I think it's against a sort of maybe a natural tendency in people to immediately jump to the part that we're, like you said, that we're paid for, being smart and problem solving.
Yeah. So getting back to the Scrum definition, it has certain rules, roles, and meetings, and artifacts, and those are very well defined. And beyond that, you have a lot of decisions to make about how you're going to implement Scrum. Right? So if you look in Scrum, there's no discussion of planning poker, which is an estimation technique. There's no discussion whatsoever of user stories, which is a way to write it's a format for writing requirements. Those things aren't in Scrum, so we're not required to do them. In fact, we could just not do planning poker, not do user stories, and according to the Scrum Guide at least, we could implement really, really good Scrum. Okay?
But also those things aren't in Agile either.
Oh, they are part of Agile, but the misunderstanding with a lot of Scrum implementers and implementations is that we must do planning poker, we must do user stories because that's Scrum. No, that's part of the wider Agile umbrella, but it's not in Scrum. You can use them. I mean, that's your call, that's your decision, but you're not required to use planning poker and user stories in Scrum. That's the point I'm making. So yeah, go ahead.
Well, so one thing you talked about is that tailoring and customizing needs to come from the people close to the work and not authority.
Well, more specifically, the team is the authority regarding that decision.
Which is a revolutionary idea, I think, in some instances.
Yeah, so it all comes down, it is a revolutionary idea, but here's why it works, right? It works in the here and now because the pace of change in our society right now is speeding up in an unrelenting way, right? So not only is there more volume of change, but the velocity of change, the change in change is increasing, right? So every single day we're bombarded with more and more societal changes that are driven by technology, right? So that's putting a lot of pressure on businesses of all kinds, right? So when things get really complex like they are now with all this change, the way you dig yourself out of that, the way you make sense of it, is by frequently inspecting, doing small iterations and frequently inspecting the results and then learning and pivoting and going again, right? So when there's no change, you don't have to iterate. When there's a whole bunch of change, you need to iterate frequently and inspect at the end of those iterations. So what we're doing when we say go to the teams and say, look, here's a process, go ahead and tailor it to your exact requirements. Go ahead. What you're doing there is you're basically encouraging the team to do frequent experiments, inspect those experiments, and then adapt based on that learning, right? So this is how we get out of really complex situations, is by empowering people at the edge, right?
Yeah.
This is how you do it. So when the pace of change slows down, we can back off on Scrum and iterative empirical process, but empirical process is your way out of complexity, genuine complexity.
Yeah, can you explain? An empirical process is your way out of complexity.
That's right. So empiricism, it's a method, and it's also a philosophy. Empiricism is a philosophy that says the best form of learning is through direct experience. And this is at the heart of Agile thinking.
So where's the edge of the application of Agile? Because you talked about how Scrum meetings, the daily stand-up meeting, was designed for a certain type of person, a certain type of mentality. And it seems like Scrum, I've read or rather listened to Jeff's book on Scrum. It can apply to almost anyone or anything. Does it fall apart at the edges? Because it seems like everyone wants to be agile. Everyone is living in a situation where there's constant change and where empiricism can help them.
Yeah. Well, first of all, everyone does not want Agile, and everyone does not want the set of Agile practices called Scrum, because to implement, if you're truly going to go all the way with this, it's going to be extremely awkward, because there's a lot of truth-telling during the inspection at the end of the iteration, right?
Yes.
And the truth, what's the cliche? The truth hurts. The truth is awkward. Right?
Yes.
So that's something that I've been, kind of preaching lately, is that, awkward is good.
Yeah, so some people are not willing to look at what's blocking them. Because, when you're doing the stand-up, you're saying, what's blocking you? The answer could be very uncomfortable.
Not only that, but developers themselves, the culture of development in software engineering is that, it's a meritocracy based on technical prowess, right? So there's one and only one alpha geek, and then there's a pecking order behind that person. And everyone pretty much knows where they lie in that order of things. And that's just the nature of software development. We're all very keen on the technological and knowledge pecking order. So, alpha geeks typically don't ask for help, don't ask questions. They answer questions, and they dispense help, right? So the third question in the Daily Scrum is particularly uncomfortable for most software engineers for this reason. The third question, what obstacles are in your way, right? Nobody wants to admit they're having any trouble.
Right.
Because then you wouldn't be the alpha geek or even a candidate for alpha geek status.
So how does open space work into this? Does open space help break down some of those boundaries for people?
Yeah, that's what it's all about. That's the whole point, right? So here's the deal, right? So you're a interaction designer guy. So I teach that meetings are games. Okay?
Yeah.
So games have goals, they have rules, they have a way to track progress, they have opt-in participation. When those things are missing, the meeting is unenjoyable and not satisfying, and you might even resent being there.
Because who wants to play a game with no rules?
Exactly. Or even worse, rules that apply to some people but not to others.
Yes.
Or rules that are vague or hard to understand or even discover. Right. In other words, not consistent across all the members.
Yeah.
Right. So here's the story. Open space is a meeting. Meetings are games. Therefore, open space is a game. It's a really, really good one because it has a really, really clear goal, right? We're going to explore the theme. And then it has a really, really good set of rules that are expressed in the one law and the 5 principles, right? And when you're done hearing the law of 2 feet and the 5 principles of open space and the 2 kind of pre-formatted templated roles, the butterfly and the bumblebee, and you hear about the saying, be prepared to be surprised, you pretty much get the message that you're free to do whatever you want and nobody can make you do anything at this meeting that you don't want to do. In fact, the meeting's invitational. You don't even have to go to it, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So when everyone gets that, notice that the normal rules of engagement have been suspended.
Right.
Everyone has equal authorization to do whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want, right?
Yes.
But it does have a beginning, and it does have an end, and there is, a middle where the sessions take place and all that. So it does have a structure, So, those who say that open space has no structure don't know. I mean, let me say it as kindly as I can. They don't know what they're talking about.
It has boundaries.
It does.
So can I ask you, I've had only, the only experience I've had with open space is reading about it. And I'm wondering how you and your journey encountered open space, because it seems to me to be very different, from a very different world than the Agile world.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding. So can I quote you on that? Because that's such a profound quote. I love that.
Yeah.
I love what you just said.
Well, thank you. Well, so how did you come to be encountered with it?
Yeah. So before I answer the question, I just want to make a comment on your statement there, right? So open space arguably is the most effective and profoundly powerful power tool for getting a legitimate agile transformation, because it gets the truth out where it belongs. That is, on the surface of the table where everyone can see it. Okay. So your comment about how there's some kind of gap between agile and open space is actually very, very interesting, because if the assumption is that open space facilitates truth telling, then that would make it one of the most agile things going on.
Yeah.
But of course, we don't use it in enterprise transformations, right? So here's what happens. We teach empirical process, we teach inspect and adapt, we teach iteration. Yet when we implement agility, it's this ABC waterfall thing. First we do assessment, then we do training, then we do coaching. So we push it too. We never ask the people what they think.
Yes.
So we extol the value of pull, we extol the value of inspection and iteration, but we don't do those things at the enterprise level of the agile adoption. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it seems very unagile.
Oh, well, thank you. Can I quote you on that?
You can. Well, I mean, I understand that you are, in the process of inviting people into the open space, you're giving them responsibility, and you're telling them that it is time to start being agile now. Well,
look, yeah. So I'm going to answer your question in a second, but let me say one more thing about open space. Open space creates the conditions. It suspends the normal interaction rules that we have at work, and it offers you a new set of rules, and it shows you how good it could actually be.
Well, so the thing about open space to me, often when I'll do a workshop, there is a design to it, a very clear arc that follows, sort of design thinking set of principles.
Yep.
And we get to a result. And there is, to me, a sense of surprise at the end, because I don't know what the result is going to be, but there's a structure.
Right.
And with open space, it seems like the structure is so minimal that the fear can creep in that how could we ever get to where we need to go with this stripped down structure?
Yeah, and that's why what open space is really designed to do is to manifest a tremendous volume of self-management, self-organization. So if you're facilitating open space, you need to be very mindful of that and refrain from any impulses you might have to, quote, help or, quote, manage their self-organization. In other words, the less you do, the more they do, so that you'll trigger more self-management by not managing anything at all. Let them manage everything.
Yeah, yeah.
And often they'll look to you to manage whatever's going on, whatever the episode is during the day that needs to, quote, be managed. And it's best to just leave that to the people themselves. And I can tell you many stories about how that all works. A real obvious one is just, when you get in the opening circle, when it's time to build up the marketplace, what I like to do is just put the microphone down and walk out of the circle. And sometimes really, really soft-spoken people will get in there and they'll hold the microphone kind of far away from their face, and they're already soft-spoken, so nobody can hear a thing they're saying, right? And you would think it would be smart for the facilitator to come in and sort of help or manage that situation, but if you just stay out of it, someone in the group will walk up, gently touch the microphone and move it very slowly closer to the speaker, right?
Yes.
And there'll be a little bit of laughing, and everyone will have a good time. And then the person who's speaking will get heard, right? But, if the facilitator goes in and manages that, you're going to basically dampen or even, discourage self-management, self-organization.
Yes. Which is the core of what you want them to get to in terms of agility.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you would think so, right? I have an assumption about this. I think all of the quality improvements in predictability, reliability, delivery cadence, all the things you're measuring and you want, customer delight, employee morale, all the things that are good from Agile, that are supposed to come out of Agile. My current belief is that all of those things come from self-management. Same people, same work. What's going on here? It's that they are now managing themselves at the point of need continuously, just in time, and you're getting tremendous efficiencies out of that. This is what's really going on. All of the things, all the goodness that comes out of agility comes out of self-management. Therefore, if your teams aren't self-managing, you don't have a prayer.
Mm.
You don't have a shot at getting any of those things because it's all about self-management. Now, if you make decisions for the team that properly belong to them per the rules of Scrum, and they go online and they read about that and they see, that was really our decision, but our manager made it. Well, guess what? That's just going to eliminate any impulse to self-manage whatsoever.
Well, it's a negative feedback loop, right? It's
That's exactly what it is. All right, so now let me answer your question. I first learned about open space back in, I think, 2008, the end of 2008, somewhere in there. And I honestly don't know. I don't remember the first one, but I think it was at the Orlando Scrum Gathering in 2009. I think that was the first one I attended. Maybe the second. I don't really remember, but it was somewhere in there. And I experienced it, and then as soon as I learned about it, I brought it in through Agile Boston, a community practice in Boston. AgileBoston.org is where you can learn about that. And we did some open spaces in the Agile community in Boston, and those were the first open spaces ever arranged in the Boston Agile community. We did them at Microsoft in Waltham, and we got a couple hundred people, and people were just like, wow, it's like amazing. And I didn't know exactly why I thought open space was so great, but I just felt like there was something there that needed to be, explored, and looked like it was something interesting for Agile work. So that's when I first learned about it and implemented it. I think the first one we did at Agile Boston was late in 2008 or early in 2009.
Yeah, it seems to me that people would look at Agile and think that it's a technical prescription and that it can be technically implemented and that it would have no effect on the individuals who are doing the work. But what I'm hearing from you is the more you got into Agile, the closer you got to this, I don't want to say like touchy-feely, but there's open space seems to be a bit more connected to the emotional or human side than I think people would look at Agile and say, oh, Agile is a human system for humans.
Okay.
And yet it seems like at the core of Agile for you is a very human process.
Yeah, because that's where all the productivity comes from. It doesn't come from processes and tools. It comes from people and interactions, right?
Right.
So, look, software development is an extremely complex endeavor. Every single product is a customized product. And software development as an engineering discipline in general, until quite recently, has been so far behind mechanical and electrical engineering and other forms of engineering that, we've been in the early Cretaceous period of development compared to some of these other engineering disciplines.
I mean, I think you guys are in the upper Paleozoic, but I'm more general to these.
Yeah. So for the longest time, So the stories that people hold in their head, the stories people tell and repeat, they tend to frame the reality of it all, right? So we've been telling ourselves for a long time early in software development, we pretended that software development was manufacturing, that we could build it like a car. First we do A, then we do B, then we do C. That's a defined process, right?
Mm.
And we learned little by little over decades that, hey, guess what? software development is not like building a car. It's more like cultivating the growth of something, right? It's more like you need empirical process for that because it's very complicated. So like when we start off in a software project, we figure that we can define these four things. We can define the cost, the delivery date, the features, and the quality. So we have this myth, or we tell ourselves this fairy tale about how we can control those four variables. And this is just a complete fabrication. You can only control three of those in software. And the one that's really ripe for negotiation and discussion is the features. So the cost, the quality, and the delivery date, those are typically business functions. Like we're making promises based on those things to customers, right? But the one thing that can move around is the features. But we continue to pretend, that we can define everything that's going to be in the product at the end. And that's just nonsense. Because as soon as you show it to the customer, the things that they want, they don't want anymore. And then they want other things. So you say, well, what about this feature over here? I mean, you said you wanted it. And they're like, yeah, I meant it at the time. But now that I see this, I understand, that's less valuable to me, and this other thing is so much more valuable. So it says in the manifesto that we're going to harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. I interpret that to mean we're going to convert customers changing their mind from a bug to a feature. In other words, we love it when they change their mind because it opens up space for us to drop some things and add some things that they really want. See?
Yeah.
So, and then we keep the cost, the quality, and the delivery date, as fixed as we can, and we let the features float around. So we know near the end of the project, we know what 85 or 90% of the features are going to be, but that last 10% we don't know until right before it ships.
Hey, this is Daniel. We're about the halfway point, so this is a great time for you to get up, stretch your legs, get some popcorn, fill up your soda. If you're in the car, stay focused. If you have your hands free, this is also a great moment to head over to the conversationfactory.com to sign up for the newsletter. I send out more detailed write-ups, insights, and tools from these conversations, and I'd love to share them with you. So head over to theconversationfactory.com and stay in the loop. So can you talk a little bit about, because I think what you're kind of mentioning there's the Pareto principle.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's very much in play. The 80-20 rule is very much in play in the development of software. So let me say, so the classic example is Microsoft Word. If you look at Microsoft Word, like 95% of the features don't even get used. So like 80% or more of the features don't get used. It's the 20% that people use that's why they buy the product, right?
Yeah.
So that's another thing in the Agile world. So the Agile practices can help us to deliver more frequently with higher quality, but if we don't focus on value, then we're just delivering a bunch of crap.
Right. So you have to say what is the 20% that we're going to
need.
Yeah.
That's right.
Need.
That's right.
And
that requires
that
interactions. You have to talk to them. You have to study what they do with the software.
I think there's also a flip side to the Pareto principle that I always think about, which is that getting to 100%, getting that last 20% of 100% takes like another 80% of effort.
Oh, yeah. Well, of course. It's an asymptote, right?
Yeah.
It approaches but never reaches it. If you want to see something really interesting, that doesn't really apply. I was thinking about something called the 90% syndrome. But if your listeners look that up, when software developers get their status, they're always 90% done.
That's hilarious. That's an interesting sickness right there.
Yeah. But the problem is that when you change the code, it introduces bugs, and then that rework creates more rework, and that's where the 90% syndrome comes from. Is we're never really done because we can never really get all the rework done because every time we add a feature, it introduces rework.
So an old programming friend of mine once told me that he felt that many people are afraid of the code, that they want to do a patch on a patch on a patch rather than pulling it apart and redoing it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's always true because the reason for that is that code gets brittle and it ceases to be soft. It becomes brittle and hard, and then if you make a change, it's like a whack-a-mole thing. You whack one and three more come up. So most people, especially stuff that's older, I mean, you make a small change and it could be terrible.
So can I take a step back? Like, I was looking at the big picture diagram on your website, which I think is really awesome, and you talk about a signal event to demonstrate what openness is and to invite people into that open space to play.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about, just in terms of organizational change and organizational agility, what a signal event and an invitation means to you.
Yeah, so people navigate the world through signals and signs, right? And in organizations, it's the leaders that are doing most of the signaling that is fresh and is what matters, right? So we're all paying attention to those leaders. So what leaders do and what leaders say is all, whether they want it to be or not, it's all interpreted as signage and signal. In other words, people are assigning meaning to the behavior of leaders.
Of course,
even if the leaders don't intend it. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. They're the conversation goes one way often. What the leader does and what they don't do both communicate something.
Yeah. So what we're trying to do is communicate certain values, right? So that we value experimentation because experimentation generates knowledge, right? We value iteration because at the end of the iteration we can inspect that and we can learn. We value continuous improvement because continuous improvement will allow us to stay in business, destroy our competitors, get more of our market share, create a thrivability environment for everyone living in our organizational space. Everyone can thrive because we have a lot of free cash coming in. Things like this. So when leaders introduce something like open space and then they follow through on it, what they're really signaling is that they want much higher levels of self-management across the organization, and that they're willing to do what it takes to manifest that.
And they have to follow. I mean, this is in my own organizational change efforts. The signal event needs to be sustained. Well, the signal event is a marker, right? And then of course there has to be follow through, right? So if the sponsor stands up, and I'm assuming that your audience listening to this knows the basics of open space and that it starts in a big circle, chairs in a circle. When the sponsor stands up and welcomes everyone after they invited him and, reiterates what the theme is and enumerates the opportunities and threats the organization's facing in the here and now, and how this is an important day of work, even though you're not doing your normal tasks and there's food all day, that this is important work and that the primary output is the proceedings, which is the basis for action coming out of the meeting, and that people who show up as passionate and responsible in this meeting are going to participate in the processing of those proceedings, the removal of the impediments that are holding us back, and the rest of that. And then they introduce the facilitator, and they sit down. That's a pretty strong signal that this is an important thing. Right, authority called us together, invited us to the meeting, and then explained what the purpose of the meeting is, and handed it over to a facilitator. That's a pretty strong signal that things have changed, right? Here we are in an all-day meeting trying to identify and solve problems, right? You do that periodically. Those open space meetings are signal events that punctuate the messaging of leadership. How often should an organization be having an event like this? When organizations embark on this journey of generating self-management, in pursuit of continuous improvement, I like the idea of at least twice a year across the whole enterprise. And if you're in different places that have it all, as much as possible, have it all in the same week in the different locations. January is a good month because that's after the holidays end. And then June, right before the vacation season, is also a good time. And by having the meetings there,
It also provides a way to, provide, how do I say it, an event for intake and sort of baptism of new employees.
That's a good way of putting it. And you talked about how the invitation brings people into the story, not buying them in, but located in the story and writing the story. And are the proceedings, the fact that people who elect themselves to be part of the process literally author the process? Is that?
Yeah. So the whole idea of the invitation is to write like the first couple paragraphs of the first chapter of the new story. Right. So the requirements of open space are a matter of grave concern to a lot of people in the situation. A decision time of like yesterday. And like high potential for conflict. So lots of people have heat around the topic, right? And like Agile adoption is like perfect for this because it has all three things. Because it's very triggering for people because it's going to change the way they do their work.
Yes.
So, when those conditions are present and then you're invited, the worst thing that the leader could possibly do is tell the whole story from the beginning to the end, because the open space meeting is intended to invite people in to write the story. So the idea here is that leaders name the direction, leaders name the guardrails or the constraints, and then they refrain from defining the how.
Yes.
And they leave that to everyone else to figure out.
So the open space meeting seems like a very, it's a big game with very few rules.
Right.
And I'm just thinking about the Scrum, the stand-up meeting it is like a smaller open space meeting. It is much shorter, but there still is a signal and there still is an invitation, and it is still about volunteering yourself.
Yeah, so put on your design thinking hat, right? And I often tell engineers, listen, keep your engineering hat on, because I want you to think about this. In engineering, what we do is we compose patterns. Right, object-oriented patterns of software development, right? So things like model view controller, dependency injection, these are patterns of object-oriented programming that we compose into applications. Same thing with meeting design. You take patterns and you compose them, right, into an experience for people. So that's what open space is. That's what the daily Scrum is. But the daily Scrum's living inside a wider sort of umbrella of events, one of which is the daily Scrum. So the daily Scrum's a design meeting, sprint planning's a design meeting, sprint demo's a design meeting. They're all within the framework. Those are events in the framework we call Scrum.
Yes.
No, but the daily Scrum and the open space meeting both are the same in the sense that they are meeting designs that are aimed at a particular end result, right? So the goal of the daily Scrum is to update everyone on the team on what the rest of the team's doing.
Yeah.
So everybody knows what everyone else is doing. The purpose of the open space meeting is to get dialogue about the things that the group is stuck on, with intent to get a bias toward action to create some escape velocity coming out of the meeting. And the proceedings are the story of that. They provide the first chapter of a wider effort, right? They're the base. They become the basis, the source document of what we're doing for the next few months here.
Which is, of course, why you need to. This is not a one and done thing. It has to be done again.
Well, yeah. Here's the thing, though, right? You need a matter of grave importance to a lot of people. You need something that everyone has heat around, pro or con. Now, here's something that's true in typical organizations. They always have something to work on.
Yes.
And there's always something that's holding back the group from its task. So if you schedule a meeting in, say, June, here we are in, early, what's the date today? We're going into
May 1st.
May. Yeah, May. So let's say by July, let's say in late June, we're going to have a meeting 2 months from now. There's something that we can work on. There's a theme. We could easily craft a theme that's hot. There's always something hot to work on.
Mm-hmm. It's a great way to describe it. Hot is a great term.
Yeah. So what I like to do is I like to have organizations schedule these events 3, 4, 5, 6 months out on a regular cadence, and the hot theme will show up 2 months before the meeting. We can be pretty clear about that. You can be pretty confident about that. You don't need to know the theme to schedule the meeting. Now, the cool thing about scheduling the meeting in the open space agility framework is a lot of people are going to resist the change because it affects their standing. So people that are in the organization, say managers, software architects, their standing is going to change when you bring agility into the picture. Okay, and they're going to be triggered by that. So, it's very, very important to bring those people into the story. You don't want them checked out, you want them checked in. So the way you check them in is you take the Agile concept of experimentation and iteration, and leadership stands up and says, hey, we're doing this meeting again in 3 months. So suspend your disbelief as we try some of these new things over the next 90 days. And if you like this meeting, you're going to really love the next one because we're going to fling things that aren't working. We're going to drop them like a bad habit. And we're going to keep things that are working. And then we're going to experiment with new things that we think can actually help us improve.
Well, so what happens to the people who are unwilling or unable to suspend their disbelief?
What's going to happen there is the new cultural imperative of experimentation is going to generate some improvement. And they're going to be left behind. Mm. They won't be writing that story. There won't be characters in that story. That's what's going to happen to them. Because when you open it up for self-management to happen, it happens, and then improvement occurs. And when improvement occurs, people get addicted to that because we're all junkies for progress. This is a fundamental thing, is that without progress, there's no buzz. There's no vibe. There's no tempo. There's just Groundhog Day. But when you have progress, then you've really got something. And people that are dragging their feet in the face of progress are going to be told by their peers that, they're kind of missing the boat. As their peers who are, getting a buzz from this are like, you're kind of a buzzkill.
It's like, look, this is literally working. And if you want to work it with us, you can. But if you don't, then eventually nobody's going to work with them anymore.
Well, and here's the interesting thing about it. It's not leadership telling them what to do. It's their peers saying, hey, you're kind of missing the boat. We're actually making tremendous progress. Have you noticed that? What are you waiting for?
This is a very organic way of looking at Agile implementation. I feel like, there's so many consultants out there where it is like you said, there's a waterfall way of bringing Agile into an organization. And it seems completely antithetical to what the thing is.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you think about it, we push Agile adoption. Usually what happens is, the executive leaders entirely well-meaning push it on the workforce without any regard for what they think and feel. This is fundamentally at odds with the manifesto, and of course, just to summarize in the interest of time, I would send you listeners to Google to type in the words "the Agile Imposition." Martin Fowler is the author of that. He's an Agile Manifesto signatory. He wrote the essay in 2006. And in that essay, he issued a protective warning against the harmful practice of pushing change on process change on teams without their consent. Now, here's the bottom line on all that. By making those decisions, and then pushing them, you're eliminating any possibility of self-management and self-organization to actually occur, because this is something we haven't talked about yet. Self-management and self-organization is all wrapped up in decision-making. So people that are making decisions are now engaged because there's something to think about there. And whenever you're thinking, you can't be paying attention to something else, can you?
No, indeed.
So when you put on a decision, it triggers self-management, because self-management is deciding something. Like self-management, what are we managing in self-management? Here's what it is. We're managing the decisions that we're making and how we make them. If there's no decisions, there's nothing to manage.
Sure.
See it?
Yeah.
So when authority tells us through push what we should do in terms of at the practice level, that just kills self-management. It's actually antithetical to Agile itself, because according to my hypothesis, all the improvement comes from self-management. So actually, it's pushing process change of any kind on a group without their consent. If the intent is self-management, because that's what gets you improvement, then you're actually chasing your tail. You're at odds with yourself.
That's amazing. Dan, I know we're coming up against time. Is there anything I haven't asked you about this that I should have asked you? What else is important to know about this topic of open space and agility? Yeah.
So if you boil it all down, everything we talked about, here's the core thing. And again, it goes to this thing about deciding. So when you invite people to go somewhere or do something, like go to an open space meeting or whatever it is, here's what's really true. You're asking them to make a decision. So this is entirely engaging and is the primary lever for triggering massive amounts of self-management across an entire organization. So here's the quote for you. Frameworks don't scale. Self-management scales. So if your framework is pushed, it can't scale by definition. Now you'll get a little buzz like someone who's smoking crack.
A new framework will give you that rush. You'll get better at something.
Yeah, but then everything will go bad. So like a crack high, everything's great for 10 minutes. And then you lose your teeth and your hair falls out. You know how it goes.
Well, I mean, it seems like, there's that old saying, beware the man of one book. I would say beware the man of one framework.
Right. All the every framework scales when self-management is what it's encouraging. Right. So even like, there's all frameworks out there for Agile. There's a framework out there called SaFE. It's typically, implemented in large organizations who have trouble changing. And it gives them sort of, some remedial practice with Agile. But the reality is, because it's pushed, you're never going to get to self-management. So through invitation, if you turn that right around and you, like, say we were implementing SaFE, and we said to folks, we want to give this a try. We want to experiment with this for 6 months, and we're going to begin an open space and have a conversation about, whether this Agile stuff even makes sense for our company, and specifically SaFE. And then we're gonna try some of the practices in SaFE, and then we're going to inspect all that. What that does is you're inviting people into the meeting, and you're also saying, we're going to have a referendum on this, in a few months. So hold your fire, and you'll be able to say whatever you want to say. This has a way of getting everyone in and customizing and tailoring. Remember, there's no standard Scrum implementation. There's also no standard SaFE implementation. So through this process of invitation, we can get tremendous amounts of tailoring and customization. So last thing, you asked what would the last thing be? Inviting generates tremendous amounts of engagement and self-management. It doesn't matter what framework it's in.
So one other thing that's sort of sparking me, which you said earlier, and I want to put a really fine point on, is this idea of truth and empiricism. That if somebody is unwilling to put their assumptions to the test, there's something fundamentally wrong there. They're hiding in the dark. And it seems people might resist this process because they're afraid of what changes will happen, of how it will disrupt their status, but also their assumptions. And this process of open space and agility and suspending our disbelief is risky if we have something that we're trying to protect.
Well, of course. What we want to protect is our standing and our level of authorization. So if you look at like typical companies, they have organizational charts, and then they have departments that have inputs and outputs, right? So one department feeds another department. So the classic is software development feeds quality assurance. And then quality assurance, gets the quality to a certain level, and then the thing ships to the customer, right? Okay. So in the Agile world, we build quality in from the beginning. That's fundamentally different than this quality at the end architecture, right? Okay. So what happens because of the software, because of the manufacturing model, the Taylorist, we're building a car model. We have this quality assurance at the end, and then we build a department around that has a department head, and has staff, right? Has hardware, software. Then there's rules, roles, jobs. and so forth that are all wrapped around that to support that. You've got this whole edifice there that, a lot of people are invested in, and they like things the way they are, and they didn't do anything wrong, and they don't want the thing to change. They've been playing the game the way authority's been, defined the game. And, now we come in and we go, this quality assurance thing at the end, probably a bad idea. We need to get the testers on the team from the beginning. We need to test first. You're going to get a tremendous amount of institutional resistance from that. Can you see why?
I mean, aside from inertia?
Well, yeah. You've got a whole department that's set up with an authority structure there around quality at the end of the software development process.
And you're talking about getting rid of their authority.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. So here's something that's true. If you're going to bring process change to an organization, here's something that's true. The way you distribute authority is going to change. That's going to be triggering for a lot of people. So through the open space process, we can gently introduce these changes and hopefully retain as many people as possible through the change. We're going to lose some people.
Yes.
But here, I have a question for you. Is it a legitimate culture change, process change model to take all the people who resist and get rid of them and replace them with people that are supporting? Is that legitimate? Is that the new normal in the world? Are we willing to validate that?
I think eventually that's kind of what will happen. Not everyone is going to be able to get with the program.
Not everyone, but what we're trying to do, think about the tremendous social equity that a manager has. They know the stories, they know the history, they're part of the story, they're part of the history, they know where all the bodies are buried, they know all the myths, all of the story behind the story. They're holding the whole thing in their hand, the culture. The executives aren't. They're defining the rules and setting strategy and executing, and they kind of create the structure for the culture. And then the line people at the team level, they're subject to the culture. But the managers actually hold it. See that?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we're gonna show all those guys the door?
No, it's much more interesting to try and unlock those people than to put them out.
Right. So open space is a super agile process, focused on people. In most organizations, what the organizations value is role over person in role. So when you bring in process change, it's very triggering for people because they realize, oh my God, my role's going to change. Role is more valuable than person around here. I need to get into a role, a safe, stable role. I need to put on some kind of exoskeleton because, this isn't good. So this is the fundamental tension, is most organizations value role over person. Now, if you're in an organization that values people over roles, you don't need open space, you don't need agility, you're already good. See?
Yeah.
So through open space, what we're doing is we're saying, look, let's all figure this out. Yeah, we're going to lose some people, and that's okay, but let's convert the resistors to tolerators and tolerators to supporters, and let's get this done. Here's the other thing I want to say about this to your listeners. If you're a listener and you're a leader in an organization that's got budget authority, and you've got say you have dozens of teams, hey, you're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe 500, 600, 700,000 on your so-called agile transformation. Wouldn't it be a good idea to gauge the organization's willingness before you embark on that huge expense? Wouldn't it be good to know what the organization's capable of doing in the here and now and kind of take a reading and assess and then apply the appropriate changes, to move the organization in that direction? I mean, you just come in, you slam Agile into an organization with total disregard to its willingness. It's the same as just throwing gasoline on money and flicking a match on it. Same exact thing. So if you really want to do this right, and you want to do it as inexpensively as possible, then you work with the willing people. So let's find out who the willing people are. That's what open space does for you.
Yes. And you work out from there.
Yeah.
A solid foundation.
And that's the other thing is in a complex, so social systems, people in groups is very complex. In a complex situation, there's no such thing as a durable plan. There's only one off and two off from here. So you do something, you try it, it shifts the state, and then you go again.
Yes.
But that's not what executives understand, and it's certainly not what they're buying.
No.
But that's at the root of agility. What they're buying is a coherent ABC story where they can understand the benefits of what they're going to receive. And they want to know how much it costs. So I heard a quote at a conference this weekend from somebody who was talking about a certain framework vendor. And this framework vendor, in response to the question, why are you selling this that's obviously, not generating a lot of self-management? The answer is, because this is what they asked me for. But guess what? What they ask you for is not what they need. That would be like a kid asking for a lot of sugar. You just keep giving it to them.
Well, I mean, it takes a very strong-willed consultant to tell their client that they're wrong. So,
well, I like to avoid that myself, because the next thing you know, they'll show you the door, right?
Yes.
So first they have to trust you. So the primary way to get some trust is to get some direct experience together. That's like I like to put them on experiences. So if you're a leader at an organization and you're listening to this podcast here, I have an experience I want you to try. I'd like you to make one of your meetings optional this week. When you go to Outlook, it's called an Outlook invitation. So why not take that all the way? Write your staff and tell them, look, you're not required to come to this meeting. If your time is best invested elsewhere in pursuit of the company's goals, please do that instead. But by the way, here's the goal of the meeting. Here's the basic structure of the meeting. Here's where we're going to track our progress. And you're invited, and I trust you to take your scarce time and attention and take it to the places where it can do the most good. I hope it's this meeting, but if it's not, that's okay. You're invited. Give that a try and see what happens. So I like to put them on that and then have a conversation and unpack that experience with them. And then through that context of that conversation, we can discuss these other things that you and I have been discussing.
And they have to be willing to give it a try and see what happens.
If they're not willing, you just dust off your feet and move on, because they're not ready. But here's the other thing. People change their mind. So you have to ask them again in a couple months, because people do change, leaders do get new learning and they change their mind.
Well, so Dan, this seems like just a fine as place to stop as any. I don't want to take your whole day, and I really appreciate the time that you spent with me. I find this stuff really interesting and incredibly eye-opening, thinking about the cadence, the invitation, the flexibility that's required to institute real change. It's eye-opening.
Yeah, real change is powered by the people who are affected by it.
Yeah. And the fear that we have.
So that's a primary message that I hope to convey through our conversation today.
And I think the fear that leaders have that if you make something optional and people won't show up means that you have a problem with engagement. And it sounds like your belief, and I think it's true, is that self-management and empowering people is the only thing that's actually going to change that.
Well, the other thing about it is that we're if I focus on this, I cannot focus on that. So, what would it be like to have most of our employees investing most of their attention most days on the things that can move the company forward, right? So this is where you're going to get all of the key performance indicator improvement. It's through the management of the attention of the humans in the workforce, right? So like Gallup has a poll that says people are like 20-30% engaged at work.
Oh, yeah.
So that means like 70% of our HR expenditure through payroll is just up in smoke. What are we doing about that? Open space is something we can do about that. So there you go.
There you go. Dan, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I look forward to listening to this and clicking it on your site.
Yep. And we're going to leave it right there. Thanks for sticking around. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on iTunes or Google Play. Thanks for your fine attention, and I'll see you next time.